Let me tell you a story about a woman named Amelia Reyes. And let me tell you right up front, this isn't a story about healing or moving on. This is a story about the kind of ice-cold certainty that only comes after a decade of agonizing heartbreak, the kind of certainty that demands justice be served, whether the law likes it or not. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. What city are you listening to this story from? Write to us in the comments. Now let's continue. Amelia lived in a town called Harbor Heights, up on the Connecticut coast. It was the kind of place where everybody knew your name, and everybody thought they knew your business. It was all picturesque lighthouses and charming little downtown shops, a postcard of American stability. That stability shattered 10 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon that had started out as beautiful as any other summer day. Her son, Daniel, was 8 years old. He had hair the color of warm honey and a smile that could melt glaciers. He loved superheroes, messy sandwiches, and riding his battered red bicycle, the Rocket, down to the little nature trail just 3 blocks from their house. "Be back by 5, Danny boy," Amelia had called out, wiping flour from her hands. She was baking cookies, the kind Daniel loved, with extra chocolate chips. "I will, Mom. Promise." That was the last time she saw him. 5 o'clock came and went. 5:30. 6. The cookies cooled on the rack, untouched. The silence in the house started to thicken, turning heavy and cold. At first, it was that usual parental anxiety, the one that makes your stomach clench. He just lost track of time. He's with a friend, but by 7 o'clock, when the shadows were stretching long and purple across the lawn, Amelia knew. She didn't just suspect, she knew in her bones that something monstrous had happened. The next few weeks were a blur of flashing blue lights, bullhorns echoing through the woods, and the relentless, invasive glare of television cameras. The face of Daniel Reyes, that sweet, gap-toothed smile, was plastered on every milk carton, every highway billboard, every newscast between here and California. The police, led by a man named Detective Miller, seemed frantic at first. They searched the woods, dragged the reservoir, and interviewed every neighbor, every store owner. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. The urgency faded. The media trucks packed up and moved on to the next tragedy. And Detective Miller, who had initially promised Amelia the world, started looking her in the eye less and less. "Mrs. Reyes," he'd say, his voice flat, "we have to consider all possibilities. Sometimes, kids run away. Sometimes, they meet with a random tragedy. We have no witnesses, no ransom note, no physical evidence of a struggle or forced entry." Amelia would grip the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. "My son didn't run away. He was 8. He loved his home, he loved those cookies, and he loved the Rocket. Someone took him." Miller would just nod slowly, offering that tired, patronizing look that screamed, "She's a hysterical mother, grief is clouding her judgment." The official investigation wound down 6 months later. They classified Daniel Reyes as a missing person, suspected to be deceased, and the file was moved to a dusty shelf in the cold case unit. But Amelia didn't move. She couldn't. You see, for most people, the passage of a decade is supposed to bring some measure of peace, some kind of forced acceptance. Not for Amelia. For her, the last 10 years weren't a decade of mourning, they were a decade of relentless, obsessive investigation. She became an expert in forensic reports, police procedure, and the geography of Harbor Heights. She went back to school online, taking courses in criminology and digital forensics. She had to. The police had failed her, and the thought that Daniel was out there, or that the person who took him was walking free, was a poison that kept her awake every single night. She took a job as a night security guard at a municipal archive warehouse, a quiet, lonely job that allowed her to spend her off hours in the silent, empty rooms, reading, researching, and trying to find the one thing the police had missed. She wasn't looking for a needle in a haystack, she was looking for a single, specific piece of thread that proved the police hadn't just failed, they had been stopped. Amelia's apartment became a shrine to the case. Not a shrine to Daniel, exactly, that was in her heart, but a shrine to the investigation. Maps of Harbor Heights covered the walls, connected by dozens of colored strings, red for dead ends, blue for interviews, and black for the areas the police had inexplicably skipped over. She had copies of every page of the official police report, filed neatly in dozens of binders. The smell of printer toner and old paper was the scent of her life. She reviewed the case file so many times she could recite the patrol routes of the officers on duty that day. She knew the names of every witness who had looked away, every person who hadn't seen a thing. Then, about 9 years and 11 months into her sentence of grief, she found the crack. It wasn't in the main police file. That file was pristine, perfectly sanitized, confirming exactly what Detective Miller had said: "Nothing to see here, folks, just a tragedy." The crack came from an unexpected source, the municipal archive where she worked. Back during the initial search, the fire department and the local auxiliary services had been called in to coordinate the massive ground search. They ran their own logs, kept their own records, and those records were stored right there, 3 floors below Amelia's small security desk. One cold night, while officially cataloging a box of outdated zoning documents, Amelia spotted a dusty, unlabeled cardboard box shoved behind a metal cabinet. Curiosity, the only emotion stronger than her grief, compelled her. She wrestled the box out and opened it. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, were the field logs of the Harbor Heights Fire Department's Search and Rescue Unit, dated 10 years prior. These weren't the sanitized police reports. These were the raw, messy notes taken by tired, scared volunteers and firefighters in the heat of the moment. She pulled out a spiral notebook, the cover damp-stained and warped. She flipped through pages documenting search grids, weather conditions, and supply lists. Her heart started to pound hard against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. And then she saw it. A single entry, scrawled in hurried handwriting, dated 2 days after Daniel disappeared. Asterisk, Unit 4 called off Grid 7B, Patrol Car 31, HHP, arrived on scene, uniformed officer. Ordered immediate stand down. Search terminated in this sector per PD instruction. Officer cited, jurisdictional conflict. Asterisk. Amelia stared at the note. Grid 7B. She knew that grid perfectly. It was a section of dense, overgrown woodland that backed up onto the sprawling estate belonging to the wealthiest family in Harbor Heights, perhaps in the whole county, the Thorns. Senator Alastair Thorne. A man whose face was on every political billboard, whose family had been in New England politics since before the Civil War. His power was absolute, his influence, undeniable. The police had ordered the search to stop in the area directly bordering the Thorne estate. Why? The official police report mentioned nothing about a stand-down or a jurisdictional conflict. It simply stated that the area had been thoroughly searched. A lie. Amelia's hands started to shake, but this time, it wasn't fear or sadness. It was the white-hot surge of pure, focused rage. She spent the next 2 weeks cross-referencing that tiny note. She needed to know who Patrol Car 31 was. That was easy enough. The daily logs of the police department, while heavily redacted in the main file, sometimes contained the patrol car assignments. Patrol Car 31 that night belonged to Officer Thomas Vance. Vance was no longer on the force. Amelia remembered seeing a small article years ago. Vance had taken an early retirement, a surprisingly generous one, the article had noted vaguely, shortly after the Daniel Reyes case went cold. He had moved to a small town in upstate New York, far from the coastal glare of Harbor Heights. Amelia packed a small bag. She didn't call anyone. She didn't tell anyone. She just drove. The meeting with Thomas Vance was tense, uncomfortable, and initially fruitless. Vance was living in a modest ranch house, clearly trying to forget his old life. He was jumpy and gray, looking 10 years older than he should have. When Amelia showed him a picture of Daniel and mentioned Patrol Car 31, he visibly flinched. "Mrs. Reyes, I don't know why you're here. That was a long time ago. I signed an NDA. I can't talk about police business." "An NDA?" Amelia asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Why would a patrol officer sign a non-disclosure agreement about a missing child case, Officer Vance? Unless you saw something you weren't supposed to see, or were ordered to do something you weren't supposed to do." She pushed the fire department log entry across the table. "Grid 7B. You were there. You called off the search. Why?" Vance looked at the log, then at Daniel's picture, and finally, his eyes landed on Amelia. He saw not just a grieving mother, but a woman who was absolutely prepared to burn his quiet life to the ground if he didn't give her the truth. He sighed, the sound rattling in his chest. It was the worst night of my career, Mrs. Reyes. I was a rookie. I saw something, and I reported it, and 20 minutes later, I was told to shut up and go home. And then, I was given a choice: take an early retirement package, or lose my pension and face an internal investigation for insubordination. Amelia leaned forward, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. What did you see, Thomas? Vance took a deep breath. I was following a hunch. Grid 7B, right where the old stone wall meets the Thorne property line. It's overgrown, nobody ever goes there. I was shining my flashlight through the brambles, and I saw a small object. It was red. I pushed through the brush, and there it was, Mrs. Reyes. Daniel's bike. The rocket. Amelia closed her eyes, a sharp, physical pain blooming in her chest. She had always known. The police had claimed they found no trace of the bike. Another lie. What else? She whispered, forcing the words out. It wasn't just the bike. Right next to it, tucked under a broken branch, was a small pile of dirt, freshly disturbed. Like someone had quickly dug something up or buried something small. And there were tire tracks. Not bicycle tracks. Large, heavy truck tires. They were partially obscured, but I got a clear picture of the tread pattern on my phone before the senator's security detail showed up. Amelia blinked. Senator Thorne's security? Yes. Not the local police. 3 men in black suits, big guys. They were on the Thorne property, but they crossed the property line and came right at me. Told me I was trespassing, that I needed to hand over my phone and the evidence I found. I told them to wait for Detective Miller. They laughed. One of them said, and I'll never forget this, Detective Miller has been informed. The investigation is moving in a different direction now, Officer Vance. Go home. He pulled a thick envelope from a drawer and slid it across the table. I was terrified. I handed over my work phone, but I had taken those photos on my personal phone first. I never showed anyone. I kept them locked away, telling myself that one day, when the senator's power faded, I'd turn them over. But his power never faded. Amelia opened the envelope. Inside were grainy, decade-old prints. The red bicycle, lying on its side, partially hidden by brush. And a close-up of the ground, the freshly turned soil, and beside it, unmistakable in the flash, the distinctive, heavy tread pattern of a specialized vehicle tire. The truth, buried for 10 years, was finally unearthed. Daniel had been taken, and the evidence had been found almost immediately, right next to the property of Senator Alastair Thorne. And the police, led by Detective Miller, had actively buried that information to protect the senator's family. But why? Amelia returned to Harbor Heights, not as a grieving mother, but as a warrior who finally knew her enemy. Her focus shifted entirely. She wasn't looking for Daniel anymore, she was looking for the reason the Thornes were protected. And she was looking for the person they were protecting. Senator Thorne had 2 children. A daughter who lived on the West Coast, a successful but apolitical lawyer. And a son. Julian Thorne. Julian was the black sheep of the family. He had been a spoiled menace since childhood, notorious for reckless driving, frequent run-ins with the law that somehow always disappeared, and a penchant for expensive, powerful toys. Amelia started digging into Julian's past, focusing specifically on the period 10 years ago. It wasn't easy. Julian Thorne's public record was cleaner than a freshly bleached sheet. Every traffic ticket, every minor assault charge, every whisper of trouble had been erased by the Thorne legal machine. But Amelia wasn't looking at public records. She was looking at the small, private details. She remembered the tire tracks in Vance's photos. They looked like specialized treads, heavy-duty, possibly off-road. What kind of vehicle would Julian Thorne, the pampered son of a senator, own that had those tires? She started looking through old society columns and local news archives from the time before Daniel disappeared. Julian Thorne, it turned out, had a passion for restoring vintage military vehicles and custom 4x4 trucks. He owned a massive, black, custom-built Humvee clone, which he frequently drove recklessly around the expansive Thorne estate, often tearing up the trails that bordered the public woods. Amelia found an obscure online forum for off-road enthusiasts where Julian, using a recognizable screen name, had once posted about the specific, unique tread pattern of the custom tires he used on his beast, his Humvee. She cross-referenced the technical specifications with the pattern in Officer Vance's photo. It was a perfect match. Julian Thorne had been driving his massive black truck near the woods where Daniel disappeared, right at the time Daniel went missing. He had likely hit Daniel, or perhaps, worse, lured him away. The fact that the bike was found with freshly disturbed earth nearby suggested a swift, panicked cleanup. And Senator Thorne's security detail had arrived almost immediately to shut down the search. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, yet she felt strangely calm. This wasn't a random tragedy. This was a cover-up, orchestrated at the highest levels, to protect a careless, privileged monster who had destroyed her life. The grief that had sustained her for 10 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. Amelia understood the game now. This was not about filing another police report that would only allow the Thorne machine to crush the evidence again, to discredit Vance, and to label her insane. She had proof of the kidnapping and proof of the cover-up, but it was fragile. To win, she couldn't just get justice for Daniel, she had to ensure that Senator Thorne and his son were not just legally implicated, but politically and socially ruined beyond repair. Her plan began to form, precise and demanding. It required patience, stealth, and a total disregard for the normal rules of engagement. Step 1 was gathering irrefutable, undeniable proof of Julian Thorne's guilt that could not be dismissed as circumstantial or historical. She needed to know exactly what happened after Julian Thorne encountered Daniel Reyes. And for that, she needed to get closer to the Thorne family than anyone had ever dared. Amelia spent the next 6 months building a new persona. She wasn't just Amelia Reyes, the heartbroken mother. She was now a meticulous, technologically savvy investigator. She focused on the internal workings of the Thorne organization. She learned about their finances, their staff, and their vulnerabilities. The senator's estate was a fortress, protected by high walls, electronic gates, and a professional security team. Getting inside was impossible. But Amelia realized she didn't need to get inside the estate. She needed to get inside their lives. Senator Thorne's political operations were centered in a lavish downtown office tower in the state capitol, about an hour away from Harbor Heights. He employed a vast staff of young, ambitious aides, all eager to please the powerful men they served. Amelia started looking for an opening, a position that would grant her access to the peripheral data streams of the Thorne operation, the forgotten files, the discarded hard drives, the things that were too mundane for the senator to worry about, but too sensitive to be thrown away carelessly. And she found it, a posting for a temporary, part-time records management specialist in the senator's archival department. The job was dull, tedious, and paid poorly, exactly the kind of position that would attract minimal scrutiny. Amelia, with her decade of self-taught archival expertise and her quiet, unassuming demeanor, was the perfect candidate. She tailored her resume, inventing a backstory involving years of freelance consulting work for small, defunct historical societies. She dyed her hair a darker shade, started wearing tailored, forgettable suits, and adopted a professional distance that masked the volcano of fury beneath her surface. She got the job. On her first day working in the gleaming, marble-floored Thorne political headquarters, Amelia felt a terrifying mix of exhilaration and dread. She was surrounded by the enemy, breathing their air, walking their halls. Her office was a small, windowless room in the basement, surrounded by filing cabinets. It was perfect. No one paid attention to the archives. No one ever went down there except to drop off boxes of outdated campaign literature. Her official task was to digitize 10 years' worth of paper records, coincidentally, covering the exact period of Daniel's disappearance. It was tedious work, but it gave her the perfect cover to examine every scrap of paper that had ever touched the Thorne organization. She wasn't looking for a confession. She was looking for patterns, for anomalies, for the financial transaction that paid off Officer Vance, or the communication that triggered the cover-up. She was looking for the digital footprint of a lie. The Thorne operation was massive, and the sheer volume of data was overwhelming. For weeks, Amelia moved slowly, carefully, digitizing thousands of documents, working late into the night, often after the rest of the staff had gone home. She installed specialized, encrypted software on her work laptop, software that allowed her to skim text for keywords: Miller, Vance, 7B, Humvee, settlement, property dispute. The first real break came not from a police file, but from the senator's internal accounting records. She found a series of irregular, large payments made 10 years ago, immediately following Daniel's disappearance. They weren't political donations or campaign expenses. They were labeled simply, legal consulting fee, confidential. The payments totaled nearly $2 million, spread out over 4 months, and were directed to a small, obscure shell corporation based in Delaware. Amelia knew shell corporations were used for 2 things: tax evasion or hiding illicit payments. She started digging into the shell corporation, a process that required patience and advanced hacking skills she had developed over the years. She discovered the shell company was owned by a single individual, a longtime personal lawyer for Senator Thorne, a man known for his ability to make problems disappear. More importantly, she cross-referenced the dates of the payments with other events. The first payment was processed exactly 3 days after Officer Vance's retirement announcement. Amelia felt a surge of triumph. $2 million, paid out in secret, to cover up a mistake made by Julian Thorne. It wasn't just a political cover-up, it was a criminal conspiracy, bought and paid for with the senator's money. But this was still circumstantial. She needed the smoking gun. She needed proof of what Julian had done with Daniel. Julian Thorne rarely visited the main office, preferring to operate out of a private residence near the estate. But Amelia learned that he maintained a small, private office on the top floor, used for personal business and storage, and he visited it roughly once a month. Amelia began timing her late-night sessions to coincide with the days before Julian's expected arrival. She started mapping the security system of the building. It was state-of-the-art, but relied heavily on key card access and biometric locks. Her archival work gave her access to the building's maintenance schedules. She noticed that the security company performed system checks every Friday at 3 a.m., requiring a temporary override of the biometric locks on certain doors for testing purposes. The top floor was usually exempt from these checks, as it contained sensitive political documents. But Amelia had noticed a small, handwritten note in a maintenance log. Julian had recently complained that his key card was malfunctioning. She took a risk. Using her access to the building's internal communication system, she anonymously submitted a maintenance request for the top-floor security panel, citing the key card issue. She timed the request to ensure the maintenance crew would need to perform a full system reboot, which, according to the protocols she had studied, would necessitate a temporary manual override of all biometric locks on that floor for a crucial 15-minute window. The next Friday, Amelia stayed late, pretending to work on a particularly dense box of old campaign flyers. At 2:55 a.m., the building was silent. Amelia felt the adrenaline pumping through her system, cold and sharp. She wore black jeans and a dark hoodie, not her usual tailored suit, and carried a small backpack containing a digital camera, specialized tools, and a set of forensic evidence bags. At 3 a.m. sharp, she heard the faint click of the maintenance crew beginning their work on the lower floors. At 3:10 a.m., she took the elevator to the top floor. She knew she had until 3:25 a.m. before the system reset. She walked quickly down the plush hallway to Julian Thorne's private office. The heavy wooden door, which usually required a fingerprint scan, now displayed a small, blinking green light, manual override engaged. Amelia slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. Julian's office was opulent, messy, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and stale cigar smoke. She didn't waste time looking at the abstract art or the imported leather furniture. She went straight to the desk. It was locked. She pulled out a small, specialized lock-picking kit she had purchased online and practiced with for months. Her hands were steady, focused solely on the task. Asterisk click. Click, asterisk the lock gave way. Inside, she found financial statements, personal letters, and a ledger detailing his private expenditures. Nothing about Daniel. Julian was too careful to keep a confession in his desk. Amelia moved to the back of the office, where a separate, smaller room was labeled storage. The door to the storage room was secured with a high-security combination lock. This was a problem. She didn't have the combination. She scanned the room desperately, her eyes darting across the surfaces. 15 minutes was ticking away. She needed a quick solution. She noticed a small, framed photo on a shelf, Julian Thorne, posing with his father, Senator Thorne, standing in front of a massive, black 4x4 truck. The Beast. Underneath the photo was a small silver plaque, engraved with a date, October 18, 2007. The date of the truck's custom completion. Amelia's mind raced. People often used significant dates for combinations. She tried the date in numerical format, 10182007. She heard a soft, mechanical thunk. The lock was open. Amelia pushed the storage door open. The room was dark, packed with dusty boxes, old campaign banners, and forgotten trophies. And then she saw it. Tucked away in a far corner, covered by a heavy tarpaulin, was a large, metal toolbox. It looked like an old mechanic's chest. She pulled the tarp off. The box was heavy, industrial, and secured with two massive padlocks. Amelia didn't have time to pick these. She heard a faint, distant noise, the elevator moving on a lower floor. The maintenance crew was finishing up. She grabbed her digital camera and snapped high-resolution photos of the toolbox, the locks, and the room. She needed to know what was inside, but she couldn't risk being caught with tools in her hands. She quickly scanned the room one last time, looking for anything that might hint at the contents of the toolbox. She spotted a small, plastic evidence bag tucked into the corner of a shelf, labeled in Julian's messy handwriting, *, do not touch. JT. *. Inside the bag was a single, small, faded piece of blue fabric. It looked like denim. Amelia's breath hitched. Daniel had been wearing a new pair of blue jeans the day he disappeared. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that the contents of that locked box were the key to everything. That box likely contained the full, horrifying truth of what Julian Thorne had done to her son. The box was probably the reason the cover-up was so extensive. The lights in the hallway outside flickered, signaling the security system was resetting. She had seconds. Amelia quickly replaced the evidence bag, closed the storage room door, spun the combination lock, and closed the desk drawer, locking it again with a practiced ease. She was back in the hallway just as the biometric reader on Julian's door flashed red, then solid green, system fully online. She took the stairs down 3 flights, then used the employee elevator to return to the basement, slipping back into her small office. She rearranged the papers on her desk, turned on the fluorescent light, and sat down, her heart still racing, but her mind already calculating. She had the evidence of the police cover-up, Vance's testimony and photos. She had the evidence of the financial conspiracy, the $2 million payout. And now, she had found the Chamber of Secrets, the locked toolbox and the piece of blue fabric that tied Julian Thorne directly to the crime. But she couldn't just call the police with this information. They were compromised. She needed to expose the entire apparatus, the senator, the son, the police chief, the dirty lawyers, in a way that was public, devastating, and impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about tearing down a structure of power built on corruption and privilege. And for that, she needed to get that toolbox open. Amelia looked at the digital photographs of the heavy-duty padlocks. She knew she couldn't use standard tools, the locks were clearly specialized. She needed the right kind of leverage, the right kind of distraction, and the right kind of help. But who could she trust? The answer was simple: no one. This was her fight, fueled by 10 years of pain. She had to become the thief, the detective, and the judge, all rolled into one. The next phase of her plan had begun, acquiring the tools, creating the opportunity, and finally, cracking open the truth buried in Julian Thorne's private vault. The world was about to learn the price of burying a child's disappearance to save a political dynasty. And Amelia Reyes was ready to make them pay every last cent. She was holding the blueprint for ruin in her hands, but the vault itself remained locked. Amelia looked at the digital photographs of Julian Thorne's heavy-duty padlocks. They weren't standard hardware store locks, they were industrial, custom-made, likely designed to resist everything short of a breaching charge. No more picking, Amelia murmured to herself, sitting alone in her basement office, the fluorescent lights humming a lonely tune. This requires destruction, or specialized access. And time. She couldn't afford another 15-minute dash. To break those locks, photograph the contents, and escape cleanly, she needed hours. She needed a disaster. A big one. Amelia went back to the building's infrastructure plans, which she had digitized under the guise of archival preservation. The Thorne political headquarters was modern, but like all complex systems, it had a single, catastrophic weakness: the server room. The senator's entire operation, campaign finance data, donor lists, sensitive political strategies, was stored in the server farm located on the 4th floor. The cooling system for that room was centralized and antiquated. If the temperature spiked, the whole network would shut down to prevent meltdown, triggering a massive, building-wide IT panic. Such a crisis would render security systems secondary to data preservation, giving Amelia the extended window she needed. Her next few weeks were spent not in dusty archives, but on the deep web. She needed tools. She purchased a miniature, high-powered thermal lance, a specialized device used for cutting through hardened steel quietly, typically by industrial salvage crews. It was untraceable, expensive, and delivered to a P.O. box 3 states away. She also bought a professional set of digital forensic tools, specialized cameras, and evidence preservation bags. She was no longer just an archivist, she was gearing up for a high-stakes burglary. The day she chose was a Tuesday, the middle of the month, far from any public holidays, ensuring maximum staff presence and therefore, maximum chaos when the alarm sounded. Amelia arrived at work at her usual time, unassuming in her tailored suit. She spent the morning meticulously cataloging documents, her heart beating a steady, cold rhythm. At 4 p.m., she made her move. She took the elevator up to the 4th floor, carrying a small, sealed container labeled, HVAC filter replacement, archival dust mitigation. She knew the security guard on the 4th floor, a boardman named Rick, hated paperwork. Just swapping out the dust filters near the main intake, Rick, she said, offering a tired smile. Senator's orders, he's worried about allergens. Rick waved her past without looking up from his crossword puzzle. Amelia quickly located the climate control panel near the server room. She didn't tamper with the thermostat, that would be too obvious. Instead, she used a small, specialized magnet she had purchased to subtly disrupt the sensor reading on the main exhaust fan unit. The system would register the fan as running normally, even though it was gradually throttling down. She returned to the basement and waited. The heat built slowly inside the server room, an invisible, silent enemy. At 6:30 p.m., the first warning light blinked on the security desk screen. By 7 p.m., the automated system began sending urgent alerts to the IT department. By 8 p.m., the building was in pandemonium. The IT team, dressed in polo shirts and looking frantic, swarmed the 4th floor. The temperature in the server room was critical, the system was threatening an emergency shutdown. The chief of security, a harried man named Mr. Jenkins, ordered a temporary, building-wide reduction of power consumption to prevent a catastrophic power surge and to conserve energy for the critical cooling units. Amelia watched the chaos from a small monitor in her basement office, a grim satisfaction settling over her. When Jenkins announced over the internal radio that the top floor, Julian's private domain, was to be manually secured and all non-essential electronic locks temporarily disabled to shunt power to the server cooling, she knew her window had opened. At 8:45 p.m., wearing her dark clothes and carrying her tools hidden in the bottom of her archival cart, Amelia took the service elevator up to the top floor. The hallway was quiet, eerily so. The usual subtle hum of the security monitoring system was gone. When she reached Julian's office door, the biometric lock was dark. Manual override. She slipped inside. The office was exactly as she had left it. She went straight to the storage room, entered the combination 10182007, and stepped into the dark vault. The toolbox sat in the corner, heavy and imposing, secured by the 2 massive padlocks. Amelia placed the thermal lance on a small, stable surface. She wrapped the work area in thick fire-retardant cloth she had brought, to muffle the sound and contain any sparks. This was the most dangerous part. If the sound traveled, even slightly, or if the lingering maintenance guard noticed a faint burning odor, she was done. She positioned the lance's tip against the first padlock shackle. She pressed the ignition. A low, intense hiss filled the small room, instantly muffled by the cloth. The lance sliced through the hardened steel like butter, but the process was agonizingly slow, requiring extreme care to avoid setting off smoke detectors. Asterisk hiss. Pause. Check for heat. Hiss. Pause, asterisk. It took her 15 minutes to cut through both shackles. When the second lock fell to the dusty concrete floor with a quiet thud, Amelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She lifted the heavy lid of the toolbox. The smell hit her first, a faint, dusty odor, like old earth and mothballs, but underneath it, something else, the sterile, chemical smell of preservation. She shone her powerful LED flashlight inside. The box was lined with custom-cut foam inserts, clearly designed to hold specific, non-standard items. The first item was a small, dusty red object. She carefully lifted it out. It was a well-loved, plastic superhero action figure, Captain Comet, Daniel's favorite. Its arm was snapped off. Amelia placed it gently into an evidence bag, her hand steady despite the tsunami of pain crashing through her. She was not grieving now, she was documenting. Next, she pulled out a section of fabric, carefully sealed in an industrial plastic bag. It was the blue denim she had seen before, but now she saw the detail, a small, embroidered lightning bolt patch, which Amelia herself had sewn onto Daniel's jeans the summer before. The denim was stiff, stained with what looked like dried mud and, horrifyingly, a deep, dark brown discoloration. The third item was a thick, leather-bound journal. It was personalized with Julian Thorne's initials embossed in gold, J.T. Amelia opened the journal to the first entry, dated 10 years ago, 2 days after Daniel disappeared. Julian's handwriting was frantic, sprawling, and almost illegible in places. She read the words, and the world narrowed down to the beam of her flashlight and the black ink on the page. Asterisk, God, God, God. I was wasted. Took the beast out, needed to blow off steam. Dad told me not to drive the trails near the perimeter, but I never listen, do I? It was dark, I swear. I thought it was a deer. Just a bump. I didn't stop. I kept going until I was halfway across the north field, then I looked in the mirror, and I saw the red bike. The little red thing. I stopped the truck and went back. It wasn't a deer. It was a kid. Small. He wasn't moving. Asterisk. Amelia read the words again, forcing the air into her lungs. Accidental. Reckless. But the next paragraph confirmed the cold malice that followed. Asterisk, I tried to wake him up. He was gone. Blood. I panicked. I called Dad. He was furious, but he was calm. He said, "Don't move, don't call the police. I'm sending the team." They got here within 20 minutes. They told me to go back to the house and stay quiet. They handled the rest. The bike, the dirt, everything. Dad said this could never get out. Not now. Not when the Senate vote is next year. He said the kid was already gone, and one boy couldn't ruin everything we built. Asterisk. Amelia finished the entry. Julian had killed Daniel by accident, but Senator Thorne had executed a deliberate, cold-blooded criminal conspiracy to hide the body and destroy the evidence, all to protect his political career. The journal continued for several more pages, detailing Julian's paranoia, his father's constant reassurance, and the confirmation of the bribe paid to Officer Vance. He even mentioned the location of the burial, a small, remote section of the estate, deep in the arboretum, marked by an ancient, gnarled oak tree that Julian hated. Amelia felt no tears, only a profound, crystalline sense of purpose. She had the truth. The full, ugly truth. She spent the next 20 minutes meticulously documenting everything. She photographed every page of the journal, every angle of the action figure, and the stained denim, ensuring the timestamp metadata on her camera was irrefutable. She placed the physical items into separate evidence bags, sealing them professionally. She then replaced the toolbox exactly as she had found it, scattering a light dusting of dust over the cut locks to hide the fresh metal. She left the storage room, secured the office, and slipped out of the building just as the IT team began to celebrate the successful stabilization of the server room. Her archival cart was heavier now, carrying not just old paper, but the weight of a decade of corruption. Back in her own apartment, surrounded by the maps and binders of the dead investigation, Amelia laid out her trophies. The blurry photos from Officer Vance, the accounting records detailing the $2 million payoff, and now, the physical evidence and the killer's own confession. She had enough to ruin them legally. But Amelia knew the system. Thorne's lawyers would argue the journal was fabricated, the evidence planted, and Amelia was a deranged grieving mother. The case would drag on for years, lost in appeals and political maneuvering, while the senator continued to wield power. No. This had to be a political execution, swift and final. Her plan, which she had been sketching out mentally for months, was divided into 3 stages: the data bomb, the physical proof, and the public humiliation. The data bomb * Amelia had spent her time in the archives doing more than just digitizing paper. She had been quietly copying the senator's entire digital infrastructure. She had access to donor lists, confidential communications, private emails, and, most importantly, the encrypted files detailing the senator's offshore financial maneuvering, the true source of the $2 million used for the cover-up. She needed to release this data in a way that ensured maximum media coverage and simultaneous federal investigation. The physical proof * the journal and the physical items, the action figure, the denim, were too fragile for a simple evidence drop. They needed to be presented by a trusted, independent third party to avoid being dismissed as tampered evidence. The public humiliation * this was the final, devastating blow. She needed the location of Daniel's remains, the gnarled oak tree in the arboretum, to be exposed publicly, simultaneously with the data release, ensuring that the revelation of the murder and the cover-up happened in the most public, painful way possible for the Thorne family. Amelia began working on the data bomb immediately. She encrypted the entirety of the Thorne files she had copied onto a secure server she controlled, far outside the jurisdiction of Harbor Heights. She created a detailed, annotated index, highlighting the financial crimes, the political favors, and the communications surrounding the Vance payoff. She contacted a well-known, fiercely independent investigative journalist named Marcus Reed, based in Washington, D.C. Reed was famous for taking down corrupt politicians and had a reputation for absolute integrity. He was the perfect vector for the data bomb. She reached out through an anonymous, encrypted channel, using a secure VPN she had routed through 3 different continents. Mr. Reed, the message read. I have the full evidence of a decade-long cover-up involving Senator Alastair Thorne, including financial crimes and the disappearance of a child. I have the digital documents, the financial proof, and the location of the body. I will provide the documents digitally. If you agree to publish the full story, I will provide the physical evidence to a party of your choosing, under strict, supervised conditions. Reed, skeptical but intrigued, responded within the hour, demanding proof of the data. Amelia sent him a small sample, the full, unredacted financial record of the $2 million payment to the Delaware Shell Company, cross-referenced with the internal memo from the senator's chief of staff confirming the insubordination of Officer Vance. The sample was enough. Reed understood the gravity immediately. This wasn't just a political scandal, this was a criminal conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government. Reed agreed to the terms. He assembled a team of forensic accountants and legal experts to analyze the data Amelia was preparing to send. Now, Amelia had to address the physical proof and the final, devastating act. She needed to confirm the location of Daniel's remains, and she needed an airtight plan to get that information to the public at the exact right moment. The journal mentioned that gnarled oak tree in the arboretum, a remote area of the sprawling Thorne estate. Amelia couldn't trespass onto the estate herself to confirm, that would risk immediate capture and the destruction of all her work. She realized she needed eyes on the ground, but not her own. She turned her attention back to the staff at the Thorne estate. Who would be on the grounds, unnoticed, and easily manipulated? The groundskeeping crew. Amelia learned that the Thorne family used an external, non-union landscaping company, which employed a rotating crew of temporary workers, mostly students or seasonal laborers. She focused on one young man, a college student named Leo, who was known to be quiet, hard-working, and perpetually in need of extra cash. Amelia found Leo on social media. She created a fictional profile, a representative for an environmental conservation group interested in the historical preservation of unique arboreal specimens in Connecticut. She contacted Leo, offering him a discreet, highly paid, consulting gig. "We are conducting a private survey of the oldest trees in the region," her message read. "We are particularly interested in the gnarled oak specimen located near the old stone wall on the Thorne property. We need precise GPS coordinates and high-resolution photographs of the trunk and surrounding soil. Discretion is paramount, the Thornes are very sensitive about their property lines." Leo, tempted by the promise of easy money, agreed. Amelia provided him with a satellite image of the arboretum, circled the approximate location of the gnarled oak, and gave him detailed instructions on how to use a professional GPS tracker and camera. 2 days later, Leo sent back the results. The photographs showed a massive, ancient oak tree, its trunk twisted and scarred. The ground around the base looked undisturbed, covered in 10 years of leaf litter and moss. But Amelia's eyes, trained by a decade of forensic study, noticed one thing in the photo that Julian's panicked journal entry hadn't mentioned. Tucked into the roots of the oak, almost completely swallowed by the earth, was a small, crudely carved initial, D.R. Daniel Reyes. Julian, perhaps in a moment of warped guilt or drunken sentimentality, had marked the spot. Amelia had her final piece of proof. The stage was set. She had the digital documents ready to be dropped, the physical evidence bagged and ready for transfer, and the confirmed location of Daniel's grave. She gave Marcus Reed a deadline. The story breaks simultaneously next Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. At 8 a.m., I will contact your designated agent with the physical evidence. At 8:30 a.m., I will ensure the final piece of the puzzle is delivered to the public. Reed agreed, the weight of the massive story settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew this would be career-defining, or career-ending. Amelia then prepared the final, most public step, the grave site revelation. She couldn't trust a journalist to handle this delicately. This needed to be a clear, undeniable statement, delivered in the most powerful way possible. She prepared a detailed, anonymous tip package, containing the exact GPS coordinates of the gnarled oak, the photograph of the D.R. carving, and a short, devastating summary of the crime, citing the cover-up by Senator Thorne. This package wasn't going to the media. It was going to the one institution that could not ignore the demand for a physical search, the FBI's Regional Field Office, and simultaneously, the Office of the State's Attorney General. The timing was everything. The data dump would expose the senator's corruption, forcing the Attorney General's hand on the financial crimes. The FBI would be forced to investigate the conspiracy and cover-up. And the anonymous tip about the body would trigger a massive, public search on the Thorne estate, guaranteeing a media frenzy that the senator could not control. Amelia spent the weekend preparing the transfer of the physical evidence. She chose a secure locker at a major transit hub in New York City, far from Harbor Heights, and prepared the drop instructions for Reed's agent. She sat in her apartment, looking at the map of Harbor Heights for the last time. The red strings connecting the dead ends had been replaced by a single, thick black line running straight from her desk to the Thorne estate. 10 years of waiting. 10 years of pain. It was all coming down to Tuesday morning. The senator, Julian, Detective Miller, they all thought they had won, that the truth was buried deep enough to be forgotten. Amelia smiled, a cold, hard expression that held no trace of the woman who had baked cookies for her 8-year-old son. She had exhumed the truth, piece by terrible piece, and now, she was ready to unleash it upon the world. The dynasty was about to fall, and Amelia Reyes was going to be the silent hand that pushed the first domino. Tuesday morning dawned overcast and damp, a fitting backdrop for the storm that was about to break. Amelia was miles away from Harbor Heights, sitting in a rented car in a massive, impersonal parking garage near the New York City Transit hub. She was dressed in layers, her face obscured by sunglasses and a baseball cap, the ultimate gray woman, disappearing into the crowd. At 7:45 a.m., she placed the heavy backpack containing Julian Thorne's journal, Daniel's action figure, and the stained denim into a prepaid secure locker. She snapped a photo of the locker number and the single-use code, encrypted the information, and sent it to a burner phone she had already provided to Marcus Reed's agent. Locker 412. Code 779 Alpha, the message read. Retrieve immediately. Do not open until you are in the presence of your full legal and forensic team. She didn't wait for confirmation. She drove immediately to a small, nondescript office park where she had rented a temporary workspace for the day, a place with strong, reliable Wi-Fi and a view of nothing but concrete. The digital clock on her screen ticked closer to 9 a.m. At 8:30 a.m., she executed the final, most crucial step of the legal trigger. She logged into her secure, multi-layered anonymous network. She sent 3 identical, encrypted emails. The recipients, the director of the FBI's New England field office, the state attorney general, and, for insurance, the chief editor of the Boston Globe. The subject line was simple: evidence of decades-long political cover-up and homicide. The body of the email contained the concise summary of the crime: Julian Thorne, vehicular manslaughter, Senator Thorne, obstruction, and conspiracy. Attached were the GPS coordinates of the gnarled oak in the Thorne Arboretum and the high-resolution photo of the D.R. carving in the root. A search warrant executed immediately will confirm the presence of human remains, the email concluded. The truth about Daniel Reyes is buried under the weight of political corruption. Amelia leaned back in her chair. Her work was done. The mechanism was in motion. Now, all she had to do was watch the world burn. At 9 a.m., the first explosion hit the internet. Marcus Reed and his team, having spent the night verifying the financial data Amelia had already provided, published their exposé simultaneously on their website and through major newswire services. The headline screamed across every major news aggregator: Thorne treasure chest, Senator's secret accounts reveal $2 million payoff tied to missing child case cover-up. It wasn't about Daniel yet, it was about the money. Reed's article meticulously detailed the Delaware Shell Corporation, the specific dates of the payments, and the internal memos confirming the forced retirement of Officer Thomas Vance. The data bomb was devastating. It proved, irrefutably, that Senator Thorne was running a massive, criminal operation to protect something, or someone. Within 10 minutes, the stock market reacted. Senator Thorne's campaign headquarters was immediately besieged by reporters. The Senate Ethics Committee announced an emergency session. But Amelia wasn't watching the political fallout. She was watching the local news feeds for Harbor Heights. At 9:30 a.m., the second explosion hit. The FBI, having received Amelia's anonymous tip package and seeing the immediate, credible financial reports, moved with terrifying speed. A convoy of black, unmarked SUVs and local police cars, though notably not Detective Miller's department, sped toward the Thorne estate. A federal judge, acting on the Attorney General's demand and the weight of the financial evidence, had issued an emergency warrant for the ground search. The news choppers were already circling the expansive Thorne property, their cameras fixed on the main gate. The narrative shifted instantly from corrupt politician to murder cover-up. Amelia watched live footage on her screen. The gates of the Thorne estate, usually impenetrable, were being rammed open by a heavy armored vehicle. Dozens of FBI agents and state police flooded the property. Senator Thorne, who had just stepped out of a tense meeting in his downtown office, was immediately met by a phalanx of reporters demanding answers about the $2 million payment. He was pale, his usual politician smile replaced by a mask of horrified denial. "This is a smear campaign. A political witch hunt," he bellowed into the microphones. But by 10:15 a.m., the cameras of the circling news helicopters captured the terrifying, undeniable image: a swarm of agents gathering in the arboretum, near a large, unmistakable gnarled oak tree. Forensic teams in white suits were setting up perimeter tape and specialized digging equipment. At 11 a.m., the news anchor's voice cracked with gravity. "We have an unconfirmed report from the Thorne estate. Sources within the FBI confirm that the forensic team has located a site of interest near a large oak tree on the property. We are awaiting official confirmation, but the search appears to be focused on the recovery of human remains." Amelia closed her eyes. 10 years. 10 years of knowing, of aching, of seeking. Now, the earth was finally giving up its secret. Daniel. The official confirmation came at 11:45 a.m. The state attorney general held an impromptu press conference on the steps of the courthouse, his face grim. "We can confirm that following the execution of a federal search warrant on the property of Senator Alastair Thorne, human remains consistent with a child of 8 years of age have been recovered. We are awaiting DNA confirmation, but initial evidence strongly suggests these are the remains of Daniel Reyes, who disappeared 10 years ago." The news conference was chaos. The political story was now a criminal tragedy. The immediate consequences were swift and total. Julian Thorne was located at a high-end golf course in South Carolina, where he was immediately arrested by state police on a federal warrant for vehicular manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to conceal evidence. The arrest was televised. Julian looked sloppy, terrified, and utterly bewildered that his father's power had suddenly failed. Senator Alastair Thorne didn't even make it back to his estate. He was intercepted by the FBI outside his downtown office, placed in handcuffs, and charged with multiple counts of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and misuse of campaign funds, the $2 million having been definitively linked to the cover-up. The image of the powerful senator, his face gray and defeated, being led into a black SUV, became the defining image of the scandal. As for Detective Miller, the fallout was equally brutal. Marcus Reed's second wave of reporting, released that afternoon, included Officer Vance's full, sworn testimony and the original photos of Daniel's bike and the tire tracks near Grid 7B. The evidence was irrefutable. Miller was arrested later that evening, charged with official misconduct and conspiracy to obstruct justice. His old department, the Harbor Heights Police, was immediately placed under state investigation. Amelia watched the downfall from her temporary hideout. She saw the news footage of the forensic team carefully removing Daniel's small, fragile remains from the cold ground beneath the gnarled oak. She saw the flash of the cameras as Reed's agent, having now handed the evidence over to the FBI, confirmed that Julian Thorne's handwritten journal contained a full confession. The journal was the nail in the coffin. Julian had accidentally killed Daniel, but the senator had made the conscious, criminal decision to bury the body and the truth. The political dynasty built over generations crumbled in a single day. The headlines were relentless: the Thorne conspiracy, from Senate seat to cell block, the boy buried by power. Amelia didn't feel elation. She felt a deep, profound emptiness, the vacuum left by 10 years of obsession finally being filled by cold, hard reality. The debt was paid. A few days later, after the initial storm had subsided, Amelia returned to Harbor Heights. She didn't go to the house, she couldn't yet. She went to the small, quiet cemetery on the hill overlooking the coast. Daniel was finally home. The funeral was small, private, and mercifully free of media. Only a handful of people attended: Amelia, Officer Vance, who had bravely come forward and was now cooperating fully with the investigation, and a few quiet neighbors who had never stopped believing her. As the small casket was lowered into the earth, Amelia looked out at the town of Harbor Heights. It looked the same, picturesque, stable. But the truth had been stripped bare. The illusion of safety built on privilege had been shattered. Later that week, Amelia received an encrypted message from Marcus Reed. The evidence was perfect, Amelia. Airtight. Julian and the senator are both being held without bail. Miller is cooperating, trying to save his own skin. The cover-up has collapsed entirely. The Senate is moving to permanently expel Thorne. We are calling you a highly placed confidential source to protect your anonymity, but the world knows the truth now. Justice was served. Amelia deleted the message. She didn't need thanks or recognition. She needed Daniel to be found, and she needed the people who took him and buried the truth to face the consequences. She packed up her apartment. The maps came down from the walls. The binders were boxed up, no longer needed. The smell of printer toner and old paper was replaced by the clean scent of fresh air. She didn't move back into the world of grieving mothers. She didn't seek therapy or support groups. She had done her job. She had honored her son not with tears, but with ferocious, unyielding action. Amelia Reyes drove away from Harbor Heights, the coastal fog heavy on the road behind her. She was a different woman now, forged in the fire of injustice. She knew that the system had failed, but she also knew that sometimes, when the powerful bury the truth, it takes one quiet, determined person to dig it up again, and use it as a weapon. She had sought justice herself, and she had found it. It was cold, it was absolute, and finally, after 10 long years, it was done.